while I invite you to maybe stretch out a little bit or stand up, shake a bit if you want. And of course, I warmly invite Karin and Gunnar to join me here on the stage. Maybe, please sit. But I thought I'd remain standing because I wanted to ask all of you a question. I was wondering if there are any foragers in the room. I see a very determined hand. I'm going to walk up to ask you questions about it. What do you forage and where?
Right now, blueberries in the forest near Wageningen, where I live. And then in autumn, I also go for porcini, or in the Dutch, eekhoorntjesbrood, which is a mushroom, and it's the best.
Super nice. Wilhelmina and I think we also share a memory of foraging very, very large bags of blueberries, when actually we didn't really have so many bags. I think both of us were about 7 years old at that time. It was a surprise. I saw another hand as well. No, you don't dare anymore? No other people who ever pick wild plants? Yeah, sometimes. What do you pick and where?
Thyme, mint, all sort of things. Yeah.
Thyme, mint. Any other plants? No? I don't believe it, but maybe we'll get there. All right. Yeah, welcome. I will introduce you to Karin and Gunnar. Gunnar, I already shared it during the tour earlier on. I met Gunnar when she was my teacher at the TU Delft, where she is working on a PhD on the politics of domesticity. Gunnar is also a researcher, an architect, a cultural worker in many different domains based in Rotterdam. And I also got to know you as someone who really practices in solidarity with many struggles that are going on, and who reflects on what is going on and brings that also into her work, and also as a very caring teacher who taught me to draw more strange animals, as I shared this morning, which is something I think is an important lesson, or was an important lesson for me. You're also a co-founder of WorkNot, which is a collective that I'm going to read this out, I think. That's devoted to discuss precarities of living practices today through spatial interventions as well as research. And I believe that you're working on a new project with WorkNot as well, right? Like you recently got a subsidy for that as well. Congratulations. Karin Reisinger is an architect, a spatial practitioner, a researcher, and Karin has been working with communities in Sápmi in northern Sweden, in the Sami regions, since 2016, 2017, when you were working on a postdoc at the KTH in Sweden. Now you're working from Vienna, where you're based, and Karin is also exhibiting in the show a practice and a project that's called, well, maybe a project is the wrong word. It's not so much maybe a one-off project as a kind of showing of a long-term practice, a long-term building alliances, friendships with women in Malmberget, which is a town that is disappearing, and which we'll hear much more about in a little bit. Is there anything you'd like to add to this? No? Yeah, maybe as a start, Gunnar, I'd like to ask you to share some first reflections on the film. What did you see?
Does this work? Yes. Thank you for the kind introduction.
I think you need to really
speak up.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for the kind introduction. Thanks for having me. Thank you all for coming on Sunday afternoon. I think the one thing I wanted to point out in this film, even though there's a lot to talk about in the film, there's a lot of intersections. I'm sure that you also have to say a lot about the film in intersections with your practice. But I think the scenes with the kind of court scenes or this kind of interrogation scenes were very interesting, where where law, which is very, very, very spatial, when in this case the law of occupation and settler colonization becomes very evident. And I think also that as architects, we are maybe more familiar with this discourse of we thinking about how law manifests in space and understand space as manifestation of the law in many ways. But I think the courtroom conversations were interesting because there was a lot of, you could see the regulations, how the regulations manifest, and the kind of rhetorics that the law creates. And and a lot of them they had very different approaches. I mean, it was clear it was scripted. I think also at the end of the film you could see. So this carefully putting together all these different positions of like, yes, I admit, or yeah, this is just for my family. I admit to nothing, or I do not believe in this law altogether. So I thought that was very interesting, especially maybe from a spatial perspective. It was this other dimension of this regulatory.
Yeah, so not just how the law creates spaces and regulations of what is and isn't possible, but it also creates kind of discourses or ways of speaking, and then also ways to speak around that law and that logic, even though, of course, they're still subjected to it. Yeah, it's maybe good to know that the film is a combination of like documentary work, but also reenactments. So indeed, some of these scenes were probably scripted. Karen, would you like to share some first reflections on the film?
Yes. Does it work? Yes.
I think so, but I think you need to keep it quite close to your mouth.
I think for me there were two actually learnings I take from these films. One is that I found it very interesting how the human body is part of the body of the land, and this is meant something very serious if it even takes the final step to go to prison. So if that is the consequence, then it's still the human body is part of the land body in a way. That's something I came across very much also, and I think that was shown very drastically in the film, even when the person says, I am the country. Is it what he said?
Yeah,
but
I am
the
nature.
land. I am
yeah.
the land. I am nature.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that was very convincing. And then I also very much, I hope I don't go against your agenda now or against the film's agenda, but I also enjoyed that there were all these tools that were so much against or worked so much against romanticizing this kind of like being part of the land. I think the plastic bags, something coming, was also a tool that was being used, and it was coming back like constantly during the film. And for me, it also worked in terms of like shifting this sometimes romantic image that we have of like being part of nature, being part of the land, but what it really means to have to live with the land, but also from the land.
Yeah, I was also really. I've been thinking since Friday the image of the carrier bag theory of fiction, which probably many of you know here. This is a story by Ursula Le Guin, famous science fiction writer, and she developed this carrier bag theory of fiction, which later on, like Donna Haraway, for instance, quotes. It's become like an image in sort of feminist discourse as well. And one thing that I think is very funny about this little story of Ursula Le Guin is that she reflects on how we can create stories that are like carrier bags, that are a bit like foraging, that are, you pick something, oh, your feet get super wet, you need to climb back up, and the rocks are a bit annoying, and you have to deal with all of these things. Actually, they're not the heroic stories, right? They are the stories of gathering something. And in that, I feel like it was also very, like what you were saying also reminds me of that it's not so much this image of either nature or humans, right? But it's really a kind of working through this muddy territory and working through with all of the tools that you need, because of course you're going to need a plastic bag if you want to pick 2 kilos of Koekoek and you need to store it in your fridge, right?
Yeah, but the plastic bag is also limited in a way, and I think that's maybe also an interesting or good thing. So if we think of the scale of the plastic bag, it's not possible to make a plastic bag with that kind of like thinness or that kind of material that you could pick a ton of. Sorry, I'm completely unfamiliar to the names of the plants, but yeah, so I think the scale of the plastic bag is also something interesting that puts it back to the micro practices and brings it back somehow to the floor and to the human hands also.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe before we dive deeper into these micro practices that are also, of course, situated in this huge political reality that is influencing it or making it impossible, I want to know a little bit more about the listening station and about the context in which you've been working, Karin, so that we kind of have all the material that we can reflect on here. And then we will continue. I believe we have some slides as well, so we can show you. Let's see how this goes. Karin, you've been working in this place in the northern part. I'll give you this, then you can just click through.
But there's no pointer, is there? No.
There might be. Is this a pointer? Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Just the green dots.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I've been so when I came to Sweden in 2016, I wanted to see basically where's the money coming from, and I was visiting some of the mining fields in the indigenous land of the Sami people in the north of Sweden. And I kind of like stayed with the town because it somehow got into my heart. That was already disappearing during that time because of the underground mining. So what you can see here, thank you for the pointer, is this is the mining field. They extract iron ore. So, and actually really a large part of the steel we use for construction in Europe is coming from these fields. There are a couple of iron ore mines in Sapmi. And yeah, so what you can see here is basically the mine. It's mined underground until 1,300 meters deep. And then this part, it gets only visible on the surface actually when sinkholes open because the ground is becoming unstable, or here where they put all the waste rock and of course all the infrastructure of the processing. But I was very much interested in this kind of town. It's Malmberget, it's called the Ore Mountain. It housed about 10,000 people, and in the middle a big pit opened. It was at the time 250 meters deep, and it's much deeper now. It's called the Captain's Pit. And people settled there to do the mining, not to have to go too far to their workplaces. And so the town basically grew around the mine. But now, since this is growing, it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, all the community has to disappear. So that was actually known since the 50s. And then people are, just have to leave and lose their homes. It's also a town that is heritage to the settler colonialism, but it has also become the home of the indigenous population. So this kind of loss of home is also an ambivalent one. And on a larger scale, we also can see there's another mine not too far from it. So this is El Kobe, a state mine for iron ore, and this is even larger, and it's mining for copper, and it's called Aitik. It's a private mine. And there's also like drilling for copper here, so probably there will soon be a third mine here. Yeah, and this is how it looks on the ground. So this disappearance of the community, it's a very slow form of violence. The houses have been taken away. This is Captain's Pit that you can see here. There's fenced off, and streets are left, but houses have already gone. And this was just in June when the sports hall, one of the last main buildings, was dismantled, and there's more fences to be needed here. And this is how Lena Høtoft, she is married to a Sami person, and she was drawing this situation for me from the indigenous perspective, and this is something very, very sad and very violent, I perceive, because you can the loss to the indigenous people, I think it's much less visible on the photos, or on also not on aerial photos, but is something kind of like longer and much more invisible. And she was drawing to me that it's like also a place where Malmberget is a place where four Sami communities basically come together. And this is Una Jerusi, so they are very much affected by hydropower stations of the river. So in earlier times, people have been living from salmon populations. So there was even a law that people were not allowed to give workers salmon on Sunday because they were eating only salmon. But now there is no single salmon left. And then this is Baste Sameby, another community, and they have all these mining centers, but also the infrastructure. So the ore has to be brought to the sea with the railways, and a lot of reindeer are killed by these infrastructures. Actually, I forgot to mention this energy line here to the hydropower is also like really huge. And here is the street to Kiruna. Also, a lot of reindeer get killed on the streets. And these towns left here, they're also growing to the south. That also needs a lot of space because these mines need a lot of workers also. And also in Aitik, this is the other mine. This is also expanding, and there's hydropower. Hydropower is also taking up. So the reindeers don't go where wind power is actually. So there's lots of really infringements to the people, and this is Nautanen, where a new copper mine is being planned at the moment. And here is the forest Samis that Lena's partner is part of, and that is Lena's house, and they will lose the house very soon due to mining. So this is this kind of like stories that I was confronted with, and I think making this kind of like visible was also something. So I was during my long and repeated stays since 2016. Also friendships grew, and we have been working together, writing together. And this is a work by Liz Marie Koekoek. She's a Sami, and she's also working as an ethnologist and also curator. She writes also poems. One is exhibited in the wonderful exhibition, and she also brings together this kind of like extractivism with the historic situations of race biology that also affected her family. So I feel the story is getting darker and darker and darker, but you also hear a lot about her practices. I want to listen to her then for 5 minutes about her practices, how she works actually with all this kind of loss and what she's doing. This is a piece by Karina Jared. She founded the Embroidery Cafe in 2016, I think, and the women embroidered the architectures before they were dismantled of the town, because Karina also wanted to create a situation for people coming together, dealing with all this loss, and trying not to get insane over it. And these also people who are very much connected to the land through their belongings. And all these four women, you can hear them speak in the exhibition. This is a poster that represents Pernilla Fagerlund's work. She has also been living in Malmberget, and she made an exhibition to the last remaining high-rise building of the town before it was being dismantled. And I'm very proud that I'm here on this list of people who contributed to this exhibition, because at this time I spent really a lot of time in Malmberget. And also this is a work by Miriam Wickman, an artist, and she documented the facades of the building. And her current project, which is in the exhibition, is about walking the paths of her ancestors through the woods to save them from clear cutting. Yeah, so this is this kind of like work that's exhibited and this kind of like long-term engagement with all of these practitioners. And should we listen to
Yeah,
that
maybe.
now or later?
No, we can listen to it in a second, but I want to, yeah, to sort of wrap this up, because like what you can hear also in what Karin is saying, that really she is here, but really through Karin there is this whole network of women who are working in this context to think about, much like I think the foragers who we just saw on the screen, right, who are working to work, who are working through a context that almost has no future, or where something is almost made impossible, where the town is literally disappearing, right? What can you do in such a context? And what can you do in such a context of loss, where the way that you lived before is no longer possible? And I think on a deeply human level, of course, like this is an extreme condition, right, that we are seeing here on the screen. Both of these contexts that we're relating to today are rather extreme conditions. But I think this question of how to go on in a context where there is no future that is possible in the same way that was there before, I feel like this is a question that probably all of us face in our own lives in some ways as well. Before I also give the word to Gunnar, I think it would be really nice to listen to Liz Marie for a bit. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I don't spare any opportunity to let the women speak for themselves, of course. So, but I think we have to put it on loud.
We moved in the nature without leaving, to say, spår. In English?
Traces.
Traces, yes.
Yeah.
You can't see the trace when you have moved with reindeer or living in the area, because we are living together with the nature.
Mm-hmm.
So other people don't even know there are Sami here. You have to fight, not every day, but often to say we are Sami living here in Gällivare as well, because they don't even see us and hear us. We are a small group and we fight for our rights all the time. They don't hear us.
And how do you do this? How do you fight for making the Sami visible?
To talk about it, to do exhibitions. I'm an ethnologist, so I talk to people, to relatives, and we put exhibitions together. I write articles, talking to politicians in Gällivare. But we are so small, so we haven't place to talk about these issues.
Is your community also shrinking because of the ongoing mining of the area of Gällivare? There's the mine in Malmberget, and there's also Aitik mine, which mines copper and is taking more space.
Yeah, so the spaces get smaller and smaller, and I live in my hometown, and you have Aitik on the one side and LKAB on the other side.
Mm-hmm. So how do you deal with all the losses, and how does it affect the health, for example, of the Sami people?
I have talked to relatives and friends who live with the reindeers and move the reindeers, and they are affected through these mining companies, and it's not well for them because they get sick and they are sad. They have loose lands and they cannot move like their grandfather or father have moved before. So people get sick, you can say.
And your work as a researcher and also as somebody working a lot with culture in different formats, is it also a reaction to deal with this loss? Or
Yeah, I think I have to do something because otherwise I get crazy. And I talk to other relatives and friends, Sami friends, and we talk about to fight for our rights in the community, and we fight to be visible. And they must listen to us. But it's difficult because it's a mining municipality.
Is also taking back of the histories or of the heritage. Is that also important for you?
It's very important because we have to put down in articles or in the exhibitions or in talks, or if I have speech, I talk about the Sami heritage in the area to let people know we have a Sami history as well here. So it's very important.
Can you describe, for example, or can you describe one example of something you did recently? For example, the exhibition at Reform, where you also documented the Samis in Koekoek.
Yeah, I do an exhibition about Koekoek and Malmberget, and I talk about that Sami people have moved over Koekoek to Malmberget with reindeers before, and it was necessary for me to point it out. And people have looked at this exhibition and they are welcoming me to talk and discuss with me. And they say, we didn't know the Sami have to move because of the mining. So I think it's, yeah.
So even the people living in the area did not know about this.
Exactly. So if you don't talk about it, people don't recognize it. It's very strange. For me, it's important to think about your different groups and different cultures living in the same area. But maybe it's because I'm an ethnologist, I don't know. We have talked about it since I was a child, about different cultures living together. In symbiose, you can say. You have roots different ways. Some of the people are Sami and Swedish and Norwegian in the same way.
This interview and thanks to Liz Marie, who's with us through the screen in this way. We were also, Alina and I were also happy enough to meet Liz Marie and Pernilla and many of the others throughout this process, which was really wonderful to also get acquainted with them through Karin. Golnar, I would really, maybe, I don't know if you still have the clicker, maybe we can go to the... yeah, this is Golnar's, yeah. Golnar, I would like to ask you, like, this question of documenting and also the role of an architect or a spatial practitioner in these kinds of contexts. How do you look at this practice of Karin's, and how do you relate it to your own?
If I may, I would go a bit of a more conceptual route.
Sure.
And then I'll arrive to the answer to your question. So a lot of I also look at my notes, so I hope that's fine.
Please make sure to keep the mic quite close to your...
yes,
yeah.
sorry. So my work concerns evicted bodies in many ways. There's a part of my practice, so I just put together 4 images just kind of as a reference. there's a part of my practice that's concerned with property regimes and ways of relating to land and the history of modern property regime in settler colonialism, which I think is also very relevant to the two works that we have seen. There's a part that's on housing and responses to this, to the evictability and displacement of human bodies, some during war and in various camp forms, and some in resisting eviction in the from their houses due to gentrification. So also rent strikes, which is the image on the right. But also there's a part of it that's connected to the relation of extraction and neoliberalized architecture of housing specifically. That would be the second image from the right. That privatizes extraction sites to produce resources for a privatized economy of architecture, which the project, the kind of collective project that you have put together is also, I think there's a reference there. There's also a part of it that's concerned with the eviction of matter from the body of the earth, only to lead to the capitalist colonial mechanisms that produce even more evictions of human bodies using that. And then I have the reference to some stone quarries in Iran, which is the image on the left. There's obviously a lot of parallels. So I think I want to make the point that, or underline that there is a lot of, that maybe for the purpose of this conversation also, the notion of eviction here that is in a lot of the work that we saw, but is also, I think, definitely something that's I would like to bring into this conversation. And I would like to unpack this a bit more. And if it's okay, I will read a part of a book that, an editorial of a book that talks about this eviction and the way that it's understood. And this is part of a book that I co-edited together with also the credits, Chris Ditto. It's published as part of the Pittsburgh Institute Master Interior Architecture program, MyArt, which is also where I teach. So this is part of the editorial. So if there is like references to some text in this book, just bear with me. So across time, extraction processes have been making and changing the spaces of the world through displacement of bodies and matter from within and across the earth. At the same time, these processes establish epistemologies and forms of representation that articulate extraction as natural or inevitable within the frameworks of anthropocentrism, capitalism, colonialism, racism, and heteroreproductivism. The closed readings of selected sites that the works in this book do point to the systemic effects of processes of extraction that remove, deplete, and uproot matter, bodies, and information simply to utilize them elsewhere. Extraction through the process of distancing, physical or otherwise, conceals and abstracts the effects of such removal and renders them invisible. In this sense, the violence at stake here is not only in the extraction process, but also in the naturalizing forces that erase the modes of perception and experience that would allow the recognition of this violence. The eviction of matter and the erasure of its displacement from world historical reality through modern aesthetics is what Rolando Vasquez describes to be a double erasure in his book, Vistas of Modernity. So there is this idea of extraction happening elsewhere. You know, that's also your work, but also a lot of the works in the Biennale address. The extraction that happens elsewhere is not here, it's there, there's a distance here. And this perception of it happening elsewhere, this distance, I think is what makes this recognition of extraction, but also of it being violent, challenging, maybe. And so just to also maybe explain a bit this idea of double erasure that Rolando Vasquez puts forward, is basically that this is the double erasure comes from the establishment of modernity in place of colonialism. And that modernity comes to kind of start as this point zero, where the same extraction, the same violence is happening, but we also don't see it as violent anymore. So, and this book specifically is about how this is done. So how our modes of perception and sensing and listening and seeing and making sense of is controlled by modernity's kind of erasure of different kinds of reality. That's why like minds can seem so innocent and architecture can seem so innocent and so on. So I think, so to come back to the question, this was a long route, but I think this is exactly the work. And I think this question of documentation, and that's also in the practices that you're documenting and kind of bringing to the table, is very much this of bringing back or reinstating, reintroducing some tools to start recognizing that this elsewhere sometimes is actually physically here, but also this elsewhere is not, does not redeem, you know, us from engaging with the violence, but also that we do need another maybe mode of engaging, another regime of engaging with this reality. And I think the interviews that you have done and all the people that you have talked to, for instance, the I forget the name, the artist that walks the path of their ancestors to reinstate this path, but also the embroidery work, document these different processes of violence in really, really interesting ways. And also, I think the whole Biennale, this is a question that's or like approached in a lot of the works.
Yeah, so this question of documentation also really comes up because we don't really see where our energy is coming from, right? Or as architects, we're also taught to not really consider, at least in my education, I was taught to not really consider where those materials come from that we work with. So it might seem very innocent to work with copper or with marble, even with steel, right? These are not things that are really considered where they are coming from. And I think what you're showing, both of you, but also what you're saying very eloquently, Gunnar, is we actually need to make visible this erasure where it's became kind of naturalized that we don't consider that, right? In a very similar way as what Liz Marie is saying, that these histories, for instance, the Sami history in Fjallevelde? No, the Gällivare. So my Swedish is not up to scratch. And Malmberget, then, so these histories that were there, the people who were living on the land before it became a mine, right? These are kind of erased in that movement where we're just not taught to consider where those materials come from. And then you're saying, no, actually, architects do need to consider all of that, and we do need to consider, we need to make that visible, and that's where all of this documentation work also comes in then. Do you, I'm really curious, I feel like we could talk for hours, but we won't, don't worry. But I'm really curious if there are any people in the audience who have a question or who have an experience that they would like to share about, for instance, a moment where suddenly something became visible that was not visible before, history, or I'll come to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, hearing this conversation, a memory came to mind again where, as a climate activist, I took action in the Rotterdam harbor and saw the large-scale coal stacks that are stored in the harbor, which show the immensity of energy usage in a real tangible example. And then I also went to Lützerath, where there's a brown coal mine, and there's this village many villages actually that get taken away for the sake of the mine. So that's my German reference to your Swedish story, where that's just a really tangible experience when you're standing on the edge of such a huge mine that doesn't actually have a lot of fencing, so you can just really walk up to the edge. And those were two moments that really, for me, cemented this idea that our energy usage that you don't see in Rotterdam when you live here is happening elsewhere, and that damage is happening elsewhere, and that brings a lot of responsibility for us here to take action on that. So, yeah.
And at the same time, what I find so complicated also, Karin, about the context that you're showing, a lot of it is green energy, right? There's a lot of the electricity lines and the hydro stations and the wind fields that also we need in this energy transition. So at the same time, it's part of the same logic that destroys this land. Is there anyone else who'd like to share something in the audience? Yeah, of course.
Well, thanks for the presentation. I find all very interesting. The iron in Sweden, I think I visited the area, changed my life forever. The volume of extraction by a company owned by the Swedish government, if I'm not wrong. You know that, Karin? The company that owns the iron mines is public company or not?
LKAB.
Yeah, it's LKAB. It's public.
A state
it's public.
company. It's a state company. It's a public company.
Okay, it's important because that means when we say Sweden as a country, we are saying LKAB. We are saying your company. So for me, this is important. Anyway, I started looking at these things after visiting that area. And what changed my life is when I look Rotterdam and I realized that Shell, the company, owns the mining rights below here. So please don't say there is not extraction going on here because they own below here. And I didn't know it, so it really changed me totally. And then I also look at concrete and aggregates and sand, and the volume of sand being extracted really like 1 million cubic meters by hour, a dredger, and broad is like enormous. Like really look at the map because it's impressive. And when I found out about these things, I wrote the companies to make sure I was not misunderstanding because I couldn't believe that Shell owns the mining rights of gas and oil below Rotterdam, where I live, and no one seems to know. And actually, they called me back next day to see whom I am. So we don't know because the companies don't want us to know. So please don't be naive and say things happen outside, don't happen here. No. They happen here, below our feet right now. And we don't know because we're talking about other stuff, which is important, but the companies don't want us to talk about here.
It's really interesting, right? That also this elsewhere is also just here. And in, for instance, the neighborhood of IJsselmonde in the south of Rotterdam, the whole urban design is created so it could encompass the gas digging machines, the ja-knikkers. So all the green strips were actually meant to hide that. So it's an interesting history. To both of you, look, when we start to see all those things that are hidden from view initially, and we start to deal with the huge loss that they are bringing in so many ways, in ways of life, in foraging, in nature, in how to stay with that loss. You've been working in this context, Karin, for the last 7-8 years. You made friends and alliances with the women who are working there. How to stay with that loss? What to do?
Yeah, I mean, responding to the question, I also must say I'm extremely privileged because I can I can select where I stay. Basically, I can be a month in Malmberget, but I can also decide to go somewhere else afterwards. And so these people, they really have this connection to the land that is not chosen, but it's also not going to change. So I think I'm the really privileged person here who can I mean, of course it's not easy, and it's also not easy to do it in a good way without epistemic extractivism and all these really difficulties that you also brought up during your talk. But I mean, like, comparing to the people who really belong to this land and they have to stay, then
it's a different perspective. But at the same time, you have been staying there. You've been going back. You've been making friends. You went somewhere where you didn't need to go in the first place. So how do you, from your practice and in your perspective, how do you deal with that loss?
As a person or as a researcher?
I don't know. Are they different?
as a person, it's certainly very hard sometimes, but I also feel that I can contribute something, and I can also like offer some kind of like supportive infrastructures.
And what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, like, for example, also enabling them to be heard here, or we've been writing texts together. We've been doing a lot in exchange, and I also like try to construct networks of exchange with other mining towns for these kind of like feminist spatial practices, as I would actually call them, to have this kind of exchange and being heard. And I don't know. And of course, I also think we have so much loss. I think also in order to prepare for the future, I think it's kind of a logical thing to do, to listen to those who have already gone through the worst or are going through the worst, and also for us in order to prepare for the future. I mean, thanks for these hints with Rotterdam. I didn't know that at all. Good luck, Rotterdam. I've been experiencing how towns can be raised also in the EU. For the sake of our resources that we need for our daily architectural practices, for example. I also like for us like to have this conversation in our technical things, sitting on this chair. So I think there's just this kind of like very big interest in like how did you manage to cope with that, and that I think we kind of like have to learn from it, but it's also very complex because there's also a power. There's also a power relationship in that, where I am also the privileged person sitting here and not at the moment not being in Malmberget and having to deal with the loss on a day-to-day basis. For example, with the pollution in the air of the mining, or with problems of all kinds of like problems of eviction.
Yeah. Gunnar, we're going to round off very soon, but I want to ask you one last question, because you're also working. I took from your sort of statement from work not that you're bringing into light the seemingly banal yet extreme conditions that shape our today's contemporary conditions of living and working. And of course, we also heard that in your statements and your reading. But how do you deal with that, documentation of eviction then, for instance, in your case?
I think it's I think I also just immediately jump into like, for like personally, or as a professional or as a researcher. Because I think there is so for me, there's a lot of writing, and a lot of publishing, maybe more than writing, a lot of trying to distribute, trying to come up with projects, also with WorkNot, that try to come up with structures or infrastructures or, networks of distributing and publishing. And a lot of times it's been also locally, or there are a lot of limitations in that also. But I think that there is a bit of that. That's I think a part of this work of trying to deal with it. But I also think there is a more professionally, there is like a kind of existential crisis that I'm also part of, or maybe a lot of us might be part of. And at risk of generalizing, I think that from a disciplinary maybe perspective as architects, I don't think we engage with these questions enough, and with questions of eviction. And I am generalizing because we have the Biennale, we have the work of Karin, Laura, all these different people that do engage with the question, or like with these forms of violence. But I think, like looking broadly, the profession kind of keeps collapsing because we don't really have really meaningful ways to engage, I think. And it has to do with claimed that this innocence is so easy to claim when it comes to design work, or like architectural design work. And maybe that's still the bridge that I also struggle, because I think there is also something about being a researcher, like an academician. There's something about doing like independent project installations, like research work that's not only academic, something about design work, and then all these different. Also, I think there's a lot of embodied histories and stuff to work through, and not all of them. I don't think we do. I don't think we have enough tools yet, or like they're not at least so at our disposal so easily to connect these things.
Yeah, when I was listening to Lisa Marie again, I thought maybe it's also a good thing that we don't have all the tools at hand like other research disciplines that are very grounded in the history of modernity, actually, that also comes with all these extractive research tools. And so I think maybe that's also a good thing, not to have all these kind of like traditional tools that we are basically have to use if we want to survive in the research field. And I think that's also very well visible in the exhibition, this kind of like opening up and making space for tools. And maybe we can also develop something like some anti-colonial gazes within the architectural field. I think there's a lot of hope for that, at least.
Well, thank you for ending on that note. Is there anyone who feels like, oh, I really need to say something before I go, because I need to get this off my chest? Well, if not, then please join me in warmly thanking Karin and Golnar. Give them a hand. And I also thank all of you for all your attention and concentration and the things you brought to the table as well. I think we'll be hanging around for a bit. So if you want to join us, that's also you're very welcome. Thank you so much, and take care.